Welcome to the Connected Campus podcast, where we explore the ways that diverse professionals are working every day to optimize their efforts to recruit, retain, and graduate their students.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Connected Campus podcast, episode number 16, another rebroadcast episode from the archives with Michael Stallard, all about creating cultures of connection. He is a quite esteemed speaker and author in this area, so really thought this was just kind of an always timely topic to resurface for you all. So this will be the last rebroadcast episode like this for a while, so we may rebroadcast more recent episodes in the future, but we had some great ones in the archive that we wanted to dust off as we were relaunching this podcast. So this was a very great one to end on, but stay tuned for more new super awesome episodes with yours truly coming up in the next several weeks. So without further ado, this is episode number 16, a rebroadcast episode with Michael Stallard.
We are really excited to be talking with Michael Lee Stallard. He's an author, also a consultant. He works with businesses, organizations, schools, institutions, all sorts of groups of people. Michael, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Jeff. It's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I didn't really hide my excitement of having you as the keynote speaker at our conference a couple of weeks ago, where you really were able to unpack some of the elements of connection culture. Just once again, let me thank you for being our keynote. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks. It was a joy, and it's something we really care about. We just feel like higher education is the future, and it's extremely important to help students, faculty, and staff understand the importance of connection and the perils of disconnection. So really appreciate the opportunity to engage with your community and learn from your clients and prospects as well.
Well, it was a fantastic experience. I think, I've done a number of these virtual conferences since the pandemic started, and I would dare say it was right up there with the best that I've experienced, which I hope is not the valedictorian of summer school, but I think we did a nice job, and you really knocked it out of the park. So thank you.
Well, congratulations. It's very important what you're doing.
Very good. Well, we'll have the link near this podcast, so if you want to go hear his session there, it's out there and can be listened to. So, Michael, I want to start with a question that really is just interesting to me, I guess. You wrote The Connection Culture, and I actually kind of ran across your work when I was speaking with an administrator at Texas Christian University. They utilized a lot of aspects of connection culture for their strategic planning, which just made tremendous sense to me. But before all of that, I'm curious, you were a consultant for years. You were working with different organizations around the aspects and elements of connection, which we'll unpack today. When did you realize you had enough material to put it into book form? What did that look like? What was that move from consultant to author in your work?
Well, it's been a long journey, Jeff. It started, my career started in technology with Texas Instruments, and then I migrated to Wall Street, where I headed marketing for part of Morgan Stanley and headed marketing for part of the Charles Schwab organization as well. So working on Wall Street, I saw that in mergers, 4 out of 5 mergers don't create economic value. And what I saw was after the mergers came together, they oftentimes clash and they don't connect, and that sabotages the plan that we expected to achieve going into the merger. And, the more I saw that, and then I also thought about my own experiences. There were times I was in workplaces where I felt really energized, and other times where I felt like the life was being sucked out of me, Jeff, quite honestly, to be candid. And I got to thinking, it wasn't me. I hadn't changed. There was something about that culture that affected me. And I decided to take a sabbatical from Wall Street, and it ended up being several years. And that led to writing our first book, Fired Up or Burned Out, that came out in 2007. And I really intended to go back to Wall Street. I kind of had that in the back of my mind. But after Fired Up or Burned Out came out, then we started getting clients, for speaking and teaching workshops, the NASA Johnson Space Center. We worked with the engineering section, so literally rocket scientists and engineers. And eventually, doors open for us to do work at places like TCU, where we have a center based on our work with Chancellor Victor Boschini. And we've worked in a wide variety of organizations over the years. I think of the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, Qualcomm in San Diego, Costco in Seattle, Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, MD Anderson Cancer Center, Yale New Haven Health. So a real wide, in Turner Construction, a real wide variety of organizations over the years. And, higher education is a big priority for us because we feel it's the future. It's extremely important.
I'm curious, when you were working with those rocket scientists, do they ever actually say it's not rocket science?
I don't recall that, but it was a highlight. I was down there with one of my colleagues, Jason Pancaw, who lives in Chicago, and we were like little boys in that place. We're like, oh my gosh, this is NASA. We just couldn't believe it. We're looking around. We're in the mission control for the Apollo project, which is kind of mothballed now, but it's still there. And we're, next door to the, we're overlooking the mission control for the International Space Station. We're walking by the, Mir's, the Russian space effort. They have a section at the Johnson Space Center. It was just really fascinating to work with them. And we learned a lot from them because this was a very technical audience, and they oftentimes were very skeptical. And so we had to figure out a way to help them develop a connection mindset. And so it involved a lot of research and stories and video clips of research to get past their intellectual obstacles and to help them also feel it and experience connection. So it was a great challenge, and it really we learned a lot from that experience over 3 years.
Wow. Now, I'm sure that coming at it from that perspective is interesting. I know that, in my work, as we work across disciplines, there are definitely personality types that are in the sciences versus perhaps in the humanities. But in terms of perspective, I know you also have another perspective in that you wrote at least Connection Culture and maybe some other work with your wife. What is that like, working with your life partner as your writing partner? What kind of perspective differences and changes does that bring to the mix?
Well, it's a joy, number one, because Katie's my beloved Katie, as I call her. She's my best friend. We've been married for over 30 years, and well over 30 years. And we have different talents. And I do almost all the research and writing, but Katie's a good editor. She really brings, and writing and editing talents are different, actually. But she's a good editor and she always improves my work. And we're a little different in this respect. I'm an early bird and she's a late nighter. So we have slightly different work schedules. And it took us a while, Jeff, to kind of acclimate to that. I was like, okay, I'm up, I'm ready to go. I'm expecting Katie to be here. And I was like, oh, that wasn't going to work. She was up till, midnight or 1 or whatever. And so we had to adjust to each other's, what was going to bring out the best in each of us.
So again, this is completely personal to me, Michael. I'm writing my first real book. I've written chapters in anthologies and academic journals and those sorts of things, but I'm writing a book about sort of the potential problems that we're facing in higher education and maybe some ways through them. What were the greatest lessons that you learned in writing these books, and do you have any advice?
Well, what I learned about writing was it really forced me to be very clear and linear in present. It's the challenge of educating people when you're communicating through one mode of communication, writing. So we also kind of use the theory of multiple intelligences, thinking, we need to present our thinking in a variety of ways. It needs to be visual through visual models, stories that really resonate with people, and it needs to be stories of connection in teams and organizations. They need to be from a variety of higher education, business, sports, the arts. And in the next edition, I was just on the phone, or I was on Zoom this morning with a colleague in South Africa, And we're looking around the world now and looking at stories of places that have created connection cultures. So the writing was very helpful in clarifying my thinking. It forced that. And then the being out there and speaking, giving keynote speeches, I should say, clarify that, especially when we can do it live, then you learn so much just seeing how people react to what you present and the feedback they give and how that helps you improve over time. We've been doing this for 20 years, so we've learned a lot, made a lot of mistakes and learned a lot. And then finally, the consulting, you're really working very closely with organizations, and you're seeing what works. And the world is messier when you start putting practices in place, and you just learn a lot from seeing what works. So there are 3 different types of activities: writing, speaking and teaching workshops versus consulting, and you learn from each of those in different ways.
So let's get to the nuts and bolts of this particular podcast. So it is called The Connected Campus. Now, I usually say to my interview, without predisposing you too much, what does connected mean? Now, you may have the best answer perhaps on the planet for this, as this is your world. So I'm really anxious to hear. What does a connected, in our case, student look like? What does a disconnected student look like? What does a connected campus mean to you?
Yeah, so just at a high level, we think of connection as, a bond among people based on shared identity, empathy, and understanding that moves people toward group-centered membership. And it's really important to students today because we know from the research for many years now, students have been struggling with anxiety, depression, feeling overwhelmed. We know that it affects their learning outcomes and graduation rates. And the CDC has found also just a high rate of suicides we've seen with students. And the CDC has found in their research that the best strategy to reduce the risk of suicide ideation is connection. And that's because when you understand the biology, connection calms our nervous system, and it helps us make better decisions because it engages the cortex in our brain. And so when students, when they don't worry alone, but they have someone they can process their worries with, that helps them make better decisions. It helps them perform better as students. It calms their nervous system so they feel better, and it just makes them more resilient. We say connection is a superpower that makes us smarter, happier, and more productive, and it makes us more resilient. And so students really need that today because we see there's a high rate of loneliness and social isolation for many students, and it's even worse during the pandemic. And that's why we're seeing the emotional health numbers spike. But it's also important for faculty and staff because education can be a lonely profession. We're not always as collaborative as we could be in education. And so that leaves, and it's stressful teaching, as we know. So when you look at the broader population in the U.S., the most recent research shows that 61% of American adults test out as lonely based on response to the UCLA loneliness scale, which is the gold standard research academic researchers use. And that means many of them are going to be struggling with emotional health issues. So it's important for students, but it's also important for faculty and staff. And we see it in outcomes, just students who have those connections, who are engaged in, say, co-curricular activities on campus, in addition to their academic activities, they perform better academically. They are more resilient. They experience more joy. You just see it in those ways I mentioned earlier, that they're better equipped physically and emotionally to give their best performance.
As I hear you talking about that, I'm hearkening back to my master's program where I think serendipitously I had a really great professor talk about a communication concept which is labeled as immediacy. And immediacy is the perceived, basically, closeness, either physiologically or psychologically, between people. And at the end of the day, what she was referring to is connection. And I've been preaching that to my public speaking students for years. I also then think about, Lencioni's work and the dysfunctions of team and how that can really make it difficult to connect. you've done, I think, a really nice job creating this framework of vision, values, and voice as sort of a central underpinning. Based on some of the experiences and stories that you have, can you explain that to our audience a little bit? Utilize, higher ed, not higher ed, whatever, because at the end of the day, we're all people. So how does vision, values, and voice really work as a sort of an underpinning to connection?
Yeah, it's a vision value, singular, just so you know.
Sorry.
Yeah, and that's common. That happens all the time. I always have to explain this, that value means that we're valued as individuals. So it is related to values, and not treated as means to an end. And so just it does help to hear a couple of examples. So just in the context of higher education, I know TCU the best because we've been doing work there for a long time. And, our center, the Center for Connection Culture, it resides in the Chancellor's office, Victor Bashini's office. And so let's start with vision. TCU's vision and mission they want to be a world-class values-centered university that educates individuals to think and act as ethical leaders and responsible citizens in a global community. And just pursuing that has produced a reputation that, they're moving up the academic rankings and doing extremely well just in terms of attracting a lot of applications for, the small number. They're a school of about 11,000 students. So they've really created a sense of pride, I would say, in a healthy sense, among faculty, staff. They rate very highly every year in the Chronicle of Higher Education's best places to work for faculty. And so there's a real sense of pride on campus that you see in faculty, students, staff, alumni, and in the Fort Worth community. So that's vision. Value is, are people valued as individuals? And that is TCU's strength, I would say. It's an institution where you walk around campus, people are friendly and helpful. You have just the faculty scholar model where the student-teacher ratio is 13-1. A quarter of the students are involved in research with their professors. I've met so many professors there who are so caring about their students. And it's not just they care about their performance in class, but they care about their lives outside of work, their academic work too. And, it just creates this, the students feel valued. They feel cared about. One of the first things that happens when they come to campus is the students go off campus with a number of their peers, other students, and have dinner at a TCU faculty or staff's home. And so if they have kids, they get to know the kids. And, you just see this throughout the entire student experience. And it's, yielded a high academic performance. They're rated one of the top institutions in terms of student engagement. In the Wall Street Journal, research that's done by Gallup. And, they attract and retain students at extremely high levels. So that's the value piece, just to mention a couple examples. You also just see it in the Chancellor, Victor Bashini. He's a super connector. He cares so much for students, faculty, and staff, and is really focused on creating this phenomenal undergraduate experience for students that changes them in terms of their competence in their chosen area that they want to gain competence in, but also their character. And he wants them to leave really having a appreciation for connection and how powerful it is in the world.
So, Michael, I've heard you talk about this before, and first of all, I love the term superconnector, but in describing him to me in the past, I think you said he's highly protective of the students and the student experience, and making sure that they really do have this sort of holistic experience in terms of what is college. They're not just a brain, they're not just a pocketbook. Talk about that protection and how that really sets the tone for the entire institution.
Let me just give a couple as an example. So one of the things over the years we've been there, I remember I mentored a young leader who headed a a student ministry on campus. And this group was attracting like, I think 300 or 400 students every Monday night on campus for a service. And they'd run out of space. And I know he went to Chancellor Boschini and shared his problem. And, the chancellor picked up the phone and that was it. They moved him to a larger facility. So the chancellor, he really supports anything that's connection oriented. There's like 30 different groups on campus that are spiritual communities, and it's not just Christian, even though, it's a real mix. The largest group on campus is a Catholic community. So it's a real mix across the board, what they have, and he really supports that. There's over 200 plus student organizations that students can get involved in. The times I walk across campus with the chancellor, it takes forever because he makes eye contact and smiles and greets everyone. He doesn't want anyone to feel left out or like he's indifferent to them. And it's amazing. He still teaches a class in the School of Education. And the times I've been in his class, he knows all the students. He knows all their names. He seems to know what's going on in their lives. It's like, how does he do that? When something happens on campus, I heard a story from a student. Her car was vandalized, and the chancellor showed up. He must get a call from like campus police or something, that he's got like a system set up. I've never asked him about this, but he showed up just to see if she was okay. I think she was shocked that the chancellor was at her door, just checking on her. It was just a quick stop by. He lived in that area, and he just stopped. So there's a few examples, but there's so many students, faculty, and TCU staff as well who live into that vision of, really caring about people. And another thing I have to give the chancellor credit for is modeling. His mantra is listening, and he's always asking questions and asking, students, faculty, staff, alumni, here's something I'm thinking about. What are your thoughts on that? And he's constantly a gathering machine of information and thinking about. It just gives him perspectives and knowledge that help him make the best decisions. So that's a couple examples. I'll give you a quick example outside of higher education that's in the news right now is Pfizer. Pfizer's vision is breakthroughs that change patients' lives. That's pretty inspiring, right? I mean, this is a massive pharmaceutical company based in New York City. And the average time to develop a vaccine historically has been about 2,500 days. Pfizer and their partner BioNTech in Germany, they developed the COVID vaccine in 266 days. I mean, this is an amazing feat that was accomplished. That vaccine is 95% effective in preventing people from getting the virus and 100% effective in terms of just protecting them from the death from the disease. So pretty amazing. You see in their culture how people are valued. You see it even in their language. They don't call people employees. They call everyone's a colleague. So it's a very egalitarian term that sends a message that we're all in this together. There aren't just people at the top and people at the bottom. We're all colleagues. And they also have a no jerks policy, so you won't last there if you're abusive to other people or disrespectful. And they also use I thought this was interesting. Some years ago, they introduced a program called Straight Talk to encourage people to exercise their voice. And now wherever you go in Pfizer around the world, you'll hear the term, in the spirit of straight talk, I think I should share this. And so they've given people permission and a language to exercise their voice, irrespective of where they are in terms of power in the organization. So those are just a few examples. I'm not surprised that they've really done phenomenal things in developing the vaccine. So there's a couple of different contexts, TCU and Pfizer.
Yeah. So I think you've given us some amazing examples of vision and value. How about voice?
Vern Clark, who's the former chief of the U.S. Navy. So he was on the Joint Chiefs, second longest serving chief in the U.S. Navy, and from 2000 to 2005. Admiral Clark, one of the things, he's interesting because he is, I think, only the second chief of the Navy who did not graduate from Annapolis. He's an engineer by training who has an MBA. And a big thing for him was he encouraged what he called constructive friction. And so he asked sailors to, speak up, dig into the data. Let's question everything we do and get better every day. And he really encouraged people to speak. I remember I was talking to the chief of information for the U.S. Navy. I was down at the Pentagon, and he was telling me a story about Admiral Clark. He said you could put Admiral Clark on a podium. He could not stand at a podium. It was like he just wanted to connect so much. He would get off the podium and walk around. He wanted to be close to people. And, he's approachable. He's one of the humblest people I've ever met. He really, truly loves. I remember I was having dinner with Admiral Clark and his wife down at the Navy Yard in D.C., and I saw him interacting with the Marines who guard the Navy Yard. They're young guys. And, you see in the way he interacts how he really cares for sailors and their families. And it just came through in, vision, value, and voice were all there. Voice was very strong because he really he has a high expectation in terms of performance. And he transformed the Navy. In fact, one of the things that you see that happened under his, the tenure he was there, when Vern Clark was appointed the chief of the Navy in 2000, the Navy was not meeting its first-term reenlistment goals of about 28% first-term reenlistment. I think it's 30%. They were falling far short of that. And Admiral Clark started doing all these things that really connected with enlisted sailors. Their first-term reenlistment shot up to almost 60% in 18 months. So it almost tripled, I think, in 18 months, which is phenomenal over the Navy's long history. So anyway, there's an example of a third example in addition to Pfizer and TCU.
That framework, I'm a huge fan of frameworks. I like to read books such as yours and sort of generate the frameworks that you give, and then turn them into my own thing if I can. When I think about one of the biggest issues plaguing higher ed today, I think of it as student success, and I realize that has a lot of tangents and tendrils, and it's an octopus with a lot of arms. I after coming away from your book, from Connection Culture, specifically think about this framework that people need help connecting to tools, to tasks, and to people. Now, these are my words. I realize that, but it's some of your words. But in terms of connecting to tools, I think that they need help connecting to content. They need help connecting to forms. They need help connecting to process. In terms of tasks, they need help with support to know how to get something done. They need help with instruction. They need help with direction. And then, of course, with people, the people can provide all of the rest of that stuff, but they also need the relationships, and they need to know that they're respected and that they're loved, they're cared for, they're networked. First of all, does that resonate with you? Sort of my interpretation of that, and what would you add in terms of student success and that framework of your 3 V's, along with the other framework around connection?
Yeah, and if your listeners, viewers, tune into the presentation I gave at the conference, they'll see some visuals that support this. But when I saw what you were doing, it was like bells went off. I really saw what we've seen for 20 years, which is we break it down this way, that leaders and individuals who perform at the highest levels, one way to think about their performance is they're intentional about achieving task excellence, and they're intentional about achieving relationship excellence, because we're hardwired to connect as human beings, and we sabotage when we're disconnected. We can't give our best performance in terms of tasks and achieve the highest level of results without connection. And so task excellence plus relationship excellence equals sustainable superior performance. Through what you're doing, you're connecting people to more efficient ways to accomplish tasks and perform them better. And that's task excellence. And you're also helping connect people to people. And that's relationship excellence. So it fits so well with that paradigm. And, relationship excellence, when we dug deeper in our research, that's when we realized that vision, value, voice held true. That the leaders in these cultures, they communicated a vision that inspired and united people. They valued people as human beings, and that connect them, and they gave them a voice. And so that created the connection that met this biological need we have for connection so we can give our best performance. So what you're doing just really aligned with everything I've seen over 20 years.
I love Paul Zach's research about oxytocin and how if you don't have oxytocin in your system, then you don't feel the ability to trust others because you don't feel networked and connected. I think about the overproduction of glutamate that can come from feeling lonely and feeling sad, and how that literally eats neurons that you need in order to think. You can walk into a classroom unprimed to be able to learn because you've got so much stress in your system. But I know you and I share an affinity for Matthew Lieberman and his work out of UCLA and his book Social. Anyone who's listening to this should pick up that book as well. I'm curious, what is it when you first read what Lieberman has done with the social brain? And I think you could argue at least a major component of the connected brain. How did that resonate with you? And then how have you been able to sort of leverage some of his work in what you've done?
Well, I've reached out to a lot of neuroscientists, a lot, and experts on stress. Like I've learned a lot from Robert Sapolsky at Stanford. Amazing, probably the world's expert on stress. And he primarily focuses on baboons, but everything also that he's learned seems to apply to human beings as well. And certainly Matthew Lieberman's work, which one of his biggest breakthroughs was on the pain of social exclusion and how that lights up the part of the brain where we feel pain. And I've learned from Ted George at the National Institutes of Health. So, and it's been fascinating. And when I try to sum it up for people, there's so much there, as you know, right? Our bodies they're like the space shuttle, which the space shuttle at its time was the most complex machine in the world. The human body is more complex. And I like to think of it this way, that because there's so much research, but I've tried to sum it up for people who don't like research as much. And, we could spend, you and I, because we love this stuff, we could talk days on end about it. But for the person who just wants us to cut to the chase, we'll give them a quick summary. We think of it as connection is a superpower, and disconnection is a super stressor. And connection, when we're in a state of we feel safe, our bodies are in a state of homeostasis, so blood glucose and oxygen are allocated to all the bodily systems at levels that they need to be healthy. When we feel threatened, feeling disconnected, being lonely or socially isolated triggers threat. Our body goes to a state of stress response, and as long as we feel that way, we're stuck in that state. And that's what's happening en masse today, because 61% of adults are lonely. They test out as lonely. So that means there's a very high probability they're in stress response. So there are bodily systems that don't get the blood glucose and oxygen they need to be healthy. The hippocampus in the brain, which is part of the memory, the digestive system, the immune system, and the reproductive system. We don't feel well when we're stuck in stress response. And so we try to manage our emotions through engaging in behaviors or substances that make us feel better, but almost all of them are addictive, other than connection is the one that is not addictive and protects us from, going into stress response. So, it's fascinating what we can learn from the neuroscience. And you think about this just historically, these insights we've had over the last couple decades, we didn't know how the body worked in these ways. Matthew Lieberman's research wasn't available. Neither was Sapolsky or Ted George at the NIH, who's had some real breakthroughs about how trauma works. And now we know. Now we know that connection has a profound effect on us. And people who don't have that connection in their life, they don't have supportive relationships, they're in big trouble. And that's why we're seeing addiction is such a big issue. They're also more prone to suicide ideation. And so that's why the Centers for Disease Control made connectedness its number one strategy to reduce the risk of suicide. So, You and I could talk for days, and we'll have to do this offline, probably, because it's so fascinating. I'd love to connect you to some of these other researchers because I think, and I'm sure you're going to know things that I haven't discovered yet. So we'll learn a lot from each other.
I view this as I get older and older. I view more of this as just serendipitous, and really I appreciate it. Yeah, at the time when you were speaking at our conference, I had just recently heard a similar little 5-minute talk about one aspect of what you talked about from Simon Sinek, and he talks about how when it comes to productivity versus trust, and I believe he used an example from the Green Berets or the SEALs or something that said that we typically promote and honor people who are very good at finishing tasks, but we don't trust them because they're often kind of jerks, and so we end up promoting jerks more than we end up promoting people who actually do both, who we trust and are good at getting stuff done. And it really resonated with me because you talked about your own story, and you mentioned that you had some struggles when you were early in your career, and I wonder if those struggles wouldn't resonate with everyone. It did with me because I know that there are times in my life when I don't remember that the other parts of connection are important. I'm so focused on the task, I forget about the people. And there's times that I'm so focused on the people, I forget about the task. But we really do need both. And I feel like leaders that can focus on both put themselves in a much, much better position for the institution, the organization, whomever they're working with to be successful. Kind of to your earlier point. Can you tell us a little bit more about that story that you told about sort of coming to the edge for you and how it really showed you need both in your life?
Yeah, there have been several times in my life where I was lonely, but I was around people and I didn't know I was lonely. But my body knew I was lonely because I had squeezed out time for relationships. One was when I was a student, and I had moved to a different dorm on campus where I didn't have friends. And it happened to be a dorm where the female to male ratio was 7-1 in the cafeteria. So I thought I was pretty excited about this. I thought it was going to be a good thing. But what I found out is the girls, they talked to each other. They didn't need me. And so I didn't really have any best friends. And I was super motivated to perform well academically. And I hit a point where I couldn't concentrate and I didn't do well. And like many of us, we resort to things that will make us feel better. In my case, it was alcohol. And I hit bottom one time. It was on a winter night when I stopped walking across the middle of the street and just stopped. And the tears flowed. And I was fortunate that a good Samaritan named Rich Tanaka, who's one of my best friends today, and was a groomsman in Katie's and my wedding. Rich, who knew me, not well, but he knew me and saw I was in trouble and came to my rescue and kind of got me back safely to the dorm and became a best friend. And then I started connecting with people, Rich's friends who lived in a dorm nearby. And then I actually moved to the floor that Rich was on, and his friends became my friends. And then things totally turned around for me. But I didn't understand, Jeff, what happened. At that time, I didn't get that it was the connection that really helped me perform better academically, but I didn't understand that. And then later in my career, I had crowded out relationships in my pursuit of, money, status, and power, I guess you could say, on Wall Street. And I didn't, because I didn't know, nobody ever told me I needed connection. I thought, failure's not an option. And so I was totally focused on succeeding. And sometimes it became extremely demanding. Some of the mergers I worked on were impossible to make the cultures work. And I was doing everything I could. And when I was home, I was thinking about work. And I started not feeling well. And I moved to engaging in behaviors and substances that I was trying to manage my moods. And eventually I left Wall Street and I just had to heal from that. So it's a pattern that's happened a few times in my life, and I now understand that relationships are not optional. I really and my wife, because I can get in that task mode. I suspect you sounds like you may be like this. There are a lot of people out there who are like this, and you can crowd out relationships. So my wife Katie is good about making sure I put my phone down at meals and that I really, I'm also in a men's Bible study on Saturday mornings. I've been in it for, gosh, I don't know how many, like probably 15 years now. Our oldest guy's in his 80s, our youngest guy's in his 20s. There's about maybe 15 to 17 of us meet online now during the pandemic. And, that's a lifesaver for me. It's connection, to share our ups and downs and pray for each other. There's a great bond there that really helps me, and I need that. So I've learned a lot from my experiences, those painful times in my life. And it's one of the reasons I really have a passion, Jeff, because I see so many people don't know that they need connection. And so it's important to me to be out there as much, helping leaders and everyone understand they're going to give their best performance if they don't crowd out connection, that if they're careful to, that they cultivate those supportive relationships at home, in the community, and in the workplace.
Just very personally, just so you know, after reading your book, I really did take sort of stock of my connectedness or not connectedness in some cases. And it really changed sort of fundamentally how I not only lived my life, but then even how I approach work, how I approach the consultations that I have with presidents and provosts and chancellors and those sorts of things. I really do see, especially in my industry of higher ed, I see people just focus on one and not the other. In a lot of contexts, students are just a grade or a GPA, or they're looking at them as a brain, I guess, a learning brain, but not as a person who needs relationships and networks and support. And then occasionally you have people who really focus on the sport, but they kind of let the other stuff go. And it really is that healthy mix of both.
It is. It's both. I think of Admiral Clark. He's a great connector, but you know what? The Navy was not going to, when the Navy was not going to fail on his command, let's put it that way. He really sweats the details when it comes to the task excellence too. He does both, and that's why he's so phenomenally successful as a leader.
Yeah. So that leads into the last question I want to ask you. We're almost out of time here. So one of the words that I really like to leverage when I'm working with a leader in terms of strategic planning, vision, consulting, mission, whatever, is the word intentional. That you need to be intentional about these things. You can't just assume that things are happening. You can't just hope that they take place. In terms of your history, your career, you've seen so much. You've told us stories about the Navy and Pfizer, as well as TCU and some other organizations you work with. Let's take out the proverbial magic wand and say, if you could use that magic wand to create sort of the ultimate connected college, the ultimate connected university, what would you do?
Well, we've learned over the years, we've developed a process, and we talk about it in our book. It's a 5-step process, and it really starts with developing a connection mindset. And we do that through presenting the research. We've developed a vocabulary and a simple, memorable, actionable model, because if it's not, we find people are so busy today they won't do it. It's got to be simple and memorable. And so that's the vision, value, voice part of it. And we do have exercises so they experience it. We have a lot of stories. Gosh, I have no idea how many profiles we've done over the years just of our clients. And, we start the book with the last edition of the Connection Culture with the story of Lin-Manuel Miranda and the team that developed the musical Hamilton. And it's phenomenal. I mean, Lin-Manuel Miranda, he's another super connector. That guy's, it's going to be interesting to see what he does in his lifetime. So, connection mindset, number one, and then helping people with practices. We have a coaching tool we developed that has attitudes, language, and behaviors so they can start putting things in place. We also sign them up for a monthly email to keep connection in front of them that we spend a lot of time working on. So that's the connection mindset. The second step is that people need to start to act to develop vision, value, voice. And when they try these, when they intentionally practice attitudes, language, and behavior that's connecting, they have developed the intellectual understanding from the training, and they're seeing the effects and they're feeling it when they put it into place. That's step 2. Then third, it's important to measure it. And so we've developed a scientifically validated assessment. A lot of organizations use employee engagement surveys. That's not bad. their connection, or measuring connection is better, I would say, in culture. But and that's important because every organization has subcultures of connection and subcultures of disconnection. So you don't really know where they are until you measure it. If you wander around, you can pick it up, but how many chancellors and college presidents and people in that high level of leadership have the time to do that? Because especially if they have a large college or university. So measuring is important. And once you measure, you can identify who's good at it and who's not in terms of your leaders and managers. And then we change by connecting, by understanding connection, putting the practices in place, but we can't do it alone. We can't self-help our way to be an intentional connector. So we really need mentors and coaches who help us become intentional connectors. And then the last step, step 5, is we celebrate acts of connection and intentional connectors who become our culture carriers in organizations. And those 5 steps really move organizations toward becoming their best selves in terms of organizations and leaders and individuals throughout the organization.
What a fantastic recipe. We love that formula. I would encourage everyone who's listening to get Connection Culture. It's a second edition or?
Second edition, right. And there's an audio book version now.
Very good. We'll make sure there's a link attached to this podcast, but please check out Michael Lee Stallard's book, The Connection Culture. I think that you will be really, really glad that you did. It will influence many, many decisions that you could make that will help with success, satisfaction, staff success, faculty success, student success, administrative success. It's really, really excellent. Thank you for being here with us. We really appreciate your time. It's been lovely talking to you.
Well, thank you, Jeff. It's an honor. I've really enjoyed getting to know you and Chris and your colleagues and just the important work you're doing.
Thanks for listening to the Connected Campus. Please leave a 5-star review for the show and share it so others can discover us. Make sure to also subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Connected Campus.